You've poured your heart into a short story, spent tons of time writing it, and you've sent it out to magazines and anthologies, and surprise, it's been accepted. And now you're staring at a contract like a deer in headlights and don't know what to do. All you want to do is get published, but one wrong clause in that contract could mess up your writing career. Don't worry, I've got you covered. In this video, you'll learn how to understand short fiction contracts, spot red and green flags, negotiate like a pro, and find resources to deepen your knowledge of copyright contracts. This will be a long video, but I promise it will be worth every minute. You'll walk away with a foundation that most writers never get. Check the timestamps and the links below for quick navigation and for all the resources that I mention in this video. And we're not covering novel contracts or literary agents in this video. That's a whole nother ballgame entirely. But a lot of this advice in this video could apply to that. This isn't legal advice. It's just the guidance I wish I had starting out on my publishing career. Hiring a lawyer for short fiction contracts often costs more than a magazine or an anthology pays, so you're on your own, but you're not alone. By the way, hello. My name is Michael La Ronn, author of over 100 science fiction, fantasy, and self-help books for writers. I've also written over 100 short stories myself, and some of those have been published in reputable short fiction venues, all with contracts that I negotiated myself. I did go to law school, and while I'm not a lawyer, I do work daily with commercial contracts in the insurance industry. Additionally, as the outreach manager with the Alliance of Independent Authors, which is a nonprofit for indie authors, I've helped writers escape bad deals. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm qualified to teach this class, but enough about me. Here we go. Let's start with the core question. What are you actually doing when you sign a short story contract? A lot of writers will say that they sold their story. No, you didn't sell it. You licensed it. Big difference. When an editor accepts your story for a publication, you're granting the editor permission to publish it in certain formats for a set period of time. After that, if you're doing it right, those rights come back to you. So here's the golden rule. Copyright always remains with the author. Always, at least if you're doing it right. If a contract tries to take your copyright or license it for the life of the copyright, run like hell. Think of your story as an endless bundle of sticks. Each stick represents a right. Ebook, print, audio, for starters. But there are other sticks in our bundle as well, like translation, movie rights, TV rights, video game rights, you name it. And if you really want me to rock your world, then you should know that every language even has its own bundle. So when you sign a contract, you're only handing over the sticks that the publisher actually needs. For the vast majority of short fiction contracts, this is ebook, sometimes referred to as electronic or electronic text, print, and in some cases, audiobook. Unless specifically negotiated, all other rights should remain in your bundle, therefore under your control. And this is the key. Those rights return to you when the contract expires. If you're doing it right. I can't say that enough. That's why short fiction contracts, and good novel contracts for that matter, are licensing contracts, not outright sales. Do me a favor and abolish the phrase selling a short story from your vocabulary, and I think we can end this misnomer together. Now, let's take those sticks we just licensed and think about them as a tiny part of a bar graph. This entire graph represents the full term of your copyright. Your lifetime plus 70 years, as it is in most countries. Some countries it's a little different, but most countries it's 70 years. We'll assume that you're going to live for a very long time. Now, if you license, say, ebook, print, and audio rights for 6 months, that's a tiny blip on the timeline. See how our sticks, this tiny little sliver of brown, are just a tiny sliver on this entire timeline? That's how much time we're dealing with here. It's a lot. It's honestly hard for most people to wrap their heads around just how much time this is. But our sticks represent a short window that we call the exclusive period. That's the time when your story first appears in that magazine or anthology exclusively. You may sometimes see these rights referred to as first rights. And to get an editor's perspective of why first rights are so important, I've included a link to an article from well-respected editor Neil Clark of Clark's World that covers what editors mean by this term and why they need first rights. Anywho, after the exclusive period ends, you get your rights back, and you can sell reprint rights elsewhere. This means that if a magazine or anthology accepts reprint submissions, you can resubmit the story and have it published all over again, technically as many times as you want, usually for a lower pay rate. There's even a market for reprints. And if your story blows up, wins awards, or gets Hollywood attention, you're still in control. Because why? Because you only licensed the rights the editor needed. You kept the rest of your sticks. That's why keeping control of your bundle is essential to running a long-term, viable author business. And remember, if you're doing this correctly, the sticks you licensed return to your bundle once the license period ends. Let's recap the key takeaways here. You don't sell stories, you license them. Only license the sticks that are necessary for the project at hand and keep the rest. And finally, your sticks return to you when the license period ends. Now that we've talked about the basics of copyright and why it's important, let's talk about why protecting your copyright matters. And guys, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, and this section might make some editors and publishers squirm, but it's for your protection. You might think of your short story as just a little thing you wrote on a weekend, but it could be gold. Some of the biggest films ever started as short stories. 2001, A Space Odyssey, that was based on a short story by Arthur C. Clarke. Memento, The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock, and Arrival, all short fiction adaptations. And then who can forget Total Recall, pun fully intended, and Minority Report. Those were short stories by Philip K. Dick. And if you're into anthology TV, like me as a practitioner of short fiction, then we can't not talk about The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, which were packed with short story adaptations. So yeah, your short stories are valuable real estate. Never forget that. And you never know which one will catch the cultural wave. But here's the twist. No one knows which stories will blow up. So if I were a shady publisher, I'd scoop up as many stories as I could, as cheaply as possible, and with ironclad contracts that give me total ownership. Because even if none of those stories become blockbusters, that library of rights still has serious value. Look at the big publishers. I'm not calling them shady, but their wealth doesn't just come from selling books. It comes from owning mountains of copyrights, most free and clear. Every title they publish is an asset. They only need a few hits because their balance sheet grows either way. And yeah, I know, it stings to think that your story, your art, your characters, you yourself are just lines on a spreadsheet, but that's the reality. And we have to live in reality, don't we? And if you don't get that, you're playing checkers while the publishers are playing 4D chess. And it's not just the big guys. Small presses play this game too. There's a lot of money in copyright. The more copyrights they own, the more valuable their business becomes. That's why you need to control your work. If your story takes off, you don't want someone else profiting off your effort through deception or a bad contract. I've seen authors give away rights for pennies, then watch their stories blow up and have amazing commercial success while they get nothing. Don't let that be you. No matter how fun short stories are and how innocent all this seems, never forget what game you're playing here. Get it wrong and you lose big. But get it right, and lightning strikes, you win big. And it's not just about movie deals, right? That's the easiest example. There are tons of ways to make money from your copyright, assuming you own it. Now that we know why protecting our copyright is so important, let's talk about the spectrum of publishers and editors out there from good to evil. I call this the spectrum of good and evil. I wish I could like magnify my voice and kind of make it sound like booming, like Charlton Heston, the Ten Commandments. But no, it's just the spectrum of good and evil. So on one end, you've got the rare thieves and scammers. These are people who are trying to outright steal your copyright. This is uncommon in short fiction, but it happens more with novels and Hollywood projects. Then there are opportunists. They start out fine, but if your story or anthology suddenly takes off, they suddenly change their tune. Money has a way of doing that to people. They're not planning to steal from you. They'll just twist the contract language or the situation in their favor if they can get away with it. These are the people you're most likely to end up with problems with. And then next, we have the well-meaning but sloppy crowd. They make honest mistakes, contracts that sound scarier than they mean, or languages that have more bark than their actual bite. But when you point these issues out, they'll usually fix them. But you have to point the issues out. And then finally, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the good ones, the editors and publishers who want a win-win. An anthology that sells well, for example, anthology or magazine issue that wins award nominations like Hugo's, and this helps the authors, the editors, and the publishers shine. These are your people. Their success is your success. But here's the kicker, and I'm just going to shoot straight. You won't know who you're really dealing with until after the lightning strikes. That's why, from a strategy standpoint, you must be fiercely protective of your copyright. And this is your public service reminder that it takes real skill to get an acceptance. I mean, think about it. You spent all this time writing a short story, and you've probably practiced your craft, and you rose out of a massive slush pile. Hundreds, maybe thousands of writers didn't. Don't do all that amazing work and then sabotage it by signing away your rights with a bad contract. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't want some people to watch this video and think, oh my gosh, I got to protect my bundle and I don't want anything to happen to it and I don't want to do any kind of deals because then I could get screwed. Listen, you want your story to be published in different magazines and anthologies. You want movie deals. You want translations. You want editors to be able to do things with the story and you can benefit commercially from it, okay? Don't misunderstand me. Don't get it twisted. What you don't want is to accidentally give those rights away and then never see a dime when others make millions off your copyright, all because you didn't understand what you were signing, okay? That, my friends, is what we're trying to avoid. That's the game that's being played here. So take care of your art, and your art will take care of you. Now it's time to dive into contract language. But first, I had to get my coffee because I think we need to take a breather. I recognize that that was a lot. And I want you to know that you don't have to learn all this stuff overnight. It'll come gradually as you gain experience. And I too started with zero legal knowledge and, you know, I was able to figure all this stuff out. And I think trust me, if I can do it, I think all of you can do it. Trust me. And so I also wanted to let you know that this masterclass is pretty much ad-free thanks to today's sponsor. So let's hear a few quick words. This video is brought to you by my book, 150 Self-Publishing Questions Answered, the book for writers wanting to know the A to Z of writing, publishing, and book marketing. It'll give you clarity, confidence, and teach you how to turn your imagination into income. Level up your author business today by visiting authorlevelup.com/150. The book is available in ebook, paperback, and audio, narrated by me. That's authorlevelup.com/150. All right, it's contract language time. We'll break this into a few sections. First, we're going to cover essential clauses. These are the clauses you must get right. Then we're going to cover important clauses. These are the clauses that usually aren't a problem, but could be in certain circumstances. And then we're going to talk about everything else. These are mostly FYI provisions that are just helpful to know that they exist. You won't see all of these clauses in every contract. Some may only have a few, but every contract is different and it helps to have a knowledge base, just a foundation to draw on so that you don't get caught off guard and you also know when something is normal and when it may not be. Oh, and it's really important to point out that editors and publishers are not villains. Well, actually, some are, but it's a small number. The vast majority of editors and publishers out there working in short fiction are good people trying to do good things. They're trying to bring short stories to the masses, and you'll find that they're wonderful people to work with. My goal with this video, honestly, is just simply to educate you so that you know when the red lights should start flashing, you know, in case you do find yourself negotiating with one of the bad apples. What I do when I get a short story contract is I print it out, and there are 3 clauses that I turn to immediately because these are the ones that I must get right. And the good news is that reputable publishers and editors usually get these right from the start. But I want to talk about the three things that I look for first. The first is the grant of rights. This is the beating heart of your contract. It's your cornerstone. It's your foundation. It spells out what you're licensing, to whom, for how long, and when those rights come back to you. If anything in a contract is going to burn you, it's the grant of rights. Here's my golden rule. If the grant of rights is bad, the whole contract is bad. And if you think about it, that makes a ton of sense, doesn't it? If you give away your entire copyright or license the wrong sticks from your bundle, then, it's kind of irrelevant what everything else says because you've just screwed up on an order of magnitude that just can't even be described. So you've got to get the grant of rights right. It's absolutely critical. The grant of rights usually sits right at the top of the contract. You can't miss it. It's usually the first provision or one of the first two or three. And remember our bundle of sticks analogy? The grant of rights defines how many sticks you're handing over. Think of it in three parts. First, rights being licensed. What formats are you licensing? With short fiction, usually ebook, print, and sometimes audio. If you're working with a magazine or literary journal, you may see the term serial rights, which just means the right to publish your story in a periodical, like a magazine or a journal. You also want to think about how will they use those rights. The publisher should be able to clearly articulate how they will use the rights you grant them. For example, a common rights grab is that a contract will take audio rights, but there's no guarantee of an audiobook production. I once had a short fiction contract where a publisher questioned why I didn't want to license my audio rights to them. And they told me that they wanted to make an audiobook, but their plans weren't set in stone yet. It was kind of loosey-goosey. It was like, well, we'll make an audiobook when we get around to it. And I told them that, look, I'm always happy to negotiate audio rights, but I'm only going to negotiate them if, one, they either increase the payment, or two, provide me a separate agreement when they actually do finalize their audio plans. Or I just need to see something more concrete in the contract. And they were willing to work with me on that. Audio is a booming right, and there are a number of places that license short stories in audio only. So you really want to make sure that the publisher is only taking the rights that they truly need in case you want to exploit them elsewhere. Also, and this is worth pointing out, who are you licensing the rights to? You're licensing them to a publisher, but we're not talking about a traditional publisher. It's often a small press. The editor of the magazine or anthology is often, but not always, the publisher. Out of bad habit, because I just can't break this habit, I sometimes refer to editors and publishers interchangeably in this video, but I want to clarify that point. The second thing we want to look for in our grant of rights is the term. How long do they have those rights that we've just talked about? The standard is anywhere from 90 days to 1 year after publication. And third, we want to think about territory. In other words, where and in what language. Sometimes you may see the term World English. Be cautious with that term. It sounds harmless, but it's actually quite broad. If the editor plans to publish your story globally, which is common these days, then it could be fine. But what does World English really mean? And think about this. If the publisher or the editor is regional and they're only publishing it in a certain part of the world, then the term World English might actually be claiming more territory than they really need. Some editors recognize this and may use narrower terms like North American rights or United Kingdom rights, which is a better fit in those situations. Every grant of rights clause is worded differently. I've never seen two of them identical. So I can't tell you exactly what yours should say. But if you're unsure about what something means, always ask the editor to clarify. And remember, good editors don't want rights that they don't need. The danger here is accidentally giving away more than you intended. That's the big mistake you can make here. And often, reputable editors, to prevent this, will insert the following line into the contract. All other rights remain with the author. When you see that phrase, the pearly gates of heaven should open up. A bunch of angels should fly out and the choir should start singing, because that is a green flag, my friends. It means that the publisher only gets what they truly need. It's also a green flag if the editor puts this phrase into the contract upon your request. All other rights remain with the author. That is a great phrase, because then you just need to make sure that everything before that sentence is clear, and then you have preserved your bundle. Good editors don't need all your rights to publish your story, and they won't ask for them. Bad ones will. That's called a rights grab, and that's exactly what you want to avoid. If you ever see phrases like life of the copyright, or full term of copyright, or terms like all formats yet to be developed in the future, that is your cue to run like hell. Think about it. If you were an author in the 1990s and you signed a contract with a grant of rights that said you're giving away all formats yet to be developed in the future, there are so many different things that weren't conceived of back then. Ebooks, for example. Now we're talking about AI and all sorts of things with that, audio. So you're basically giving up all of the future potential of your story. And I'll see how many times I can get the word potential in a sentence. Because I can't repeat myself enough, I want to give you a visual of how to think about grants of rights so that you understand how to negotiate everything and keep it all in your head. There are a lot of moving pieces to these clauses, and so it's important to just get everything on the board, and then you can understand how everything functions. So I like to call this grant of rights foursquare. It's kind of like the kids game. Sometimes the ball bounces back and forth between all these four squares, and when you're reading these clauses and you're negotiating, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to just wrap your head around everything. So what I like to do is just on a piece of paper, just draw this and then get everything on the board so I don't forget all the things that I need to be thinking about when I'm thinking of grant of rights. Before we continue, I have a key at the bottom of this screen. Green is good, brown is caution, and red is danger, just to kind of color code everything here. So when we talk about grant of rights, the first thing we talked about was the rights being granted. Now, for short fiction, if you see ebook in print, that's normal, that's good, that's what you would expect. Audio is also common, but that should send up some signals to your brain to make sure that you're negotiating that correctly and that that's properly delineated and that you're not accidentally giving it away. Okay. And then any other rights that might happen to be mentioned, you just want to pay attention. Just make sure that there's nothing else mentioned. And if there is, you need to discuss that with the editor or the publisher and negotiate accordingly. Now, the thing is that these clauses are not going to say, yes, we would like movie rights, please. Yes, we would like translation rights, please. No, that's not how it works. You give things away accidentally because the language is too broad. So what you should be looking for is language that is narrow. The narrower, the better. That's generally the best practice with grant of rights. Okay, so if we move across the board here, we also want to think about term. Okay, so common is 90 days to 1 year after publication, exclusive period. Generally speaking, that's what I've seen in the vast majority of my contracts. Anything less is, I'm not going to complain, but anything more, and you really want to think about that and discuss that with the publisher. Okay. And then if you ever see the terms life of copyright or similar language, spidey senses should go off. You need to get that stricken from the contract. No good can come of language like that in a contract. Okay. So now, moving across the board even further, we're going to talk about territory. So we talked about English rights, how it's typically customary to license English rights only or have specific countries or regions listed. That's generally a good thing. If you see World English, just make sure that it makes sense. And then another potential red flag is that no languages are mentioned at all. Okay, so generally good contracts are going to specify that it's English language rights only. Every once in a while, you might see they might want some additional languages or something like that, but typically it's going to be English language rights only. Now, if no languages are mentioned, got to be careful. Like I said, you want to make sure that you're not accidentally giving away all languages. Okay, I think we can agree that would be a mistake. And then finally, the fourth part of the four-square that we want to think about is the wild cards. Okay, these are the things that that can introduce some spice, for lack of a better word, into the negotiations. Also, potential snakes in the grass, okay, to use another legal term. So green flag would be seeing something like all other rights remain with the author at the very end of your grant of rights. Great phrase to put in your contracts. Great phrase to see. Now, another thing I want you to be aware of is action verbs that don't make sense. Okay, so I'm going to put some verbs up on the screen here. And what you'll notice about the ones that are here right now, so produce, distribute, sell, market, promote. Okay, these are all things that are part and parcel to what a publisher typically does for a magazine or an anthology, right? Like if I said, I'm gonna take your story and I'm going to market it and produce it and format it and do all that stuff, that all those action verbs that make sense for a publisher, that makes total sense. Beware of action verbs that don't make sense. For example, I once had a contract offered to me where the publisher wanted to do all of the things you see on the screen here, and they wanted to translate the story. And I thought, wait a minute, the contract is for English language only. Why am I giving them translation rights? And we worked together and we were able to get that off of the grant of rights. So you just want to be careful with action verbs, okay? And action verbs can kind of clue you into the publisher's intent, and it can give you good context clues to ask the right questions about what they actually are intending to do with your story when they license it. Now, there's also archive clauses. We're going to talk about that later. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about archive clauses. Just know that these aren't in the grant of rights. This is another clause that exists in the contract. If it exists, then you need to be very careful that what you're doing in your grant of rights also communicates with the archive clause. They need to match and align. But again, we'll talk about that later. Just remember that if you see it, put it on the board so you don't forget about it. And then you want to be thinking also about other clauses that connect with the grant of rights. So sometimes you'll see little sentences sprinkled throughout the contract that kind of, I don't know, they might be connected to the grant of rights. Okay, it's hard to explain, but every contract is a little different. So if you see something that calls back to the grant of rights, or it calls back to the exclusive period, or it calls back to the rights being granted, that sort of thing, put that on the board too. Okay. And then the last thing to worry about, and this is one you want to really be careful of, okay? And that is rights grabs posing as fluffy wording. Sometimes you will see words and phrases in a contract, but specifically in the grant of rights, that make no sense. These phrases add no value at all to what's going on. And in fact, they actually confuse the situation. So you want to scrutinize every word and every phrase and make sure that it belongs in the grant of rights. Sometimes it really is just fluffy stuff. Other times it could be a snake in the grass. It could be something that could potentially be a real problem for you down the road. So that's what you want to be thinking about when we're playing grant of rights Foursquare. So guys, do with this what you will. This is just, I think, a helpful way to think about the grant of rights. And hopefully this serves as a helpful recap and helping you understand everything. That's the grant of rights. We'll cover how to negotiate later in this video, but those are the key tips to understand when you look at your grant of rights for the first time. Now let's talk about the second essential contract clause that I always review promptly, and that's payment. Yes, we all want to get paid, but this clause is about way more than money. The payment section of your contract should clearly state three things: how much you'll be paid, when you'll be paid, and how you'll be paid. Let's talk about how much you'll get paid first. You'll usually get one of three setups: a flat fee, typically per word, a royalty share, where the publisher shares a percentage of each sale with you, or sometimes both. The important part, clarity. At the time I record this video, the pro rate determined by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, SFWA, is about 8 cents per word. So for a 5,000 word short story, you would make $400. not bad, but it's not exactly retirement money either. So always check the SIFWA website for the most current pro rate. And as you know, I got the link in the comments for you. Now keep in mind, the figure I just gave you, 8 cents per word, is the top end of the market. Smaller markets often pay less than the pro rate, and that's fine. It's to be expected. You can ask for more money if you want, and if the publisher has a budget for it. Small presses often don't have that kind of budget, so it's up to you. Do what you want, but don't be the author that only thinks in shades of green. We have to keep our eyes on the ball. If you get screwed here, it'll be because you didn't pay enough attention to the payment details, not because of how much you get paid. Next, let's talk about when you're paid. You'll usually see two options. On acceptance, that's a green flag, means you get paid right away. And then on publication, which is also fine, but it can take months. If the payment is on publication, track your payment date. You're responsible for following up and holding the publisher accountable. And stay tuned for the end of this video. I've got a simple trick to make that easy. For this reason, vague payment timelines in the contract are a red flag. If an editor refuses to clarify exactly when you'll be paid, that's your cue. Walk away. Next, let's talk about how you're paid. Flat fees are usually handled by check, PayPal, Venmo, no problem there. Royalty splits is where you need to be very careful. The only safe way to do this right now is through a trusted platform like Draft2Digital, which offers a payment splitting service. Draft2Digital automatically tracks sales, pays contributors monthly, and prevents publishers from changing terms behind your back. I'll link to an article describing the service so you can see why so many publishers and authors trust it. So that's Draft2Digital, which is all great. But if the publisher calculates royalties manual, meaning they send you the payments themselves, that's a hard no. Way too risky, even with good intentions. Mistakes happen, editors vanish, or worse, they could pass away, and your royalties are left in limbo. This is an easy way to get screwed. I avoid anything other than a Draft2Digital payment service personally. It's just too much risk. You just want to make sure that if Draft2Digital or similar service is used, make sure it's explicitly stated in the contract, and that if there are any percentages like allocations to different authors listed, that those numbers are correct. That said, some contracts will combine a flat fee payment plus a royalty share, or some contracts might even let you choose what you want. You can choose between a flat fee or a royalty share. Another thing to look out for in today's age is Kickstarter. So some anthologies in particular are funded with Kickstarter campaigns, and there may be a clause in the contract that specifies that you'll receive more money if the Kickstarter is successfully funded, which is great. So for example, a contract might pay 6 cents a word, but if the Kickstarter funds successfully, then the payment for the contributors increases to 8 cents. All right. Totally fine. Just make sure that everything is clear and that both parties are on the same page about what's going to happen. And that, my friends, is it for payment. The last of my top 3 essential clauses that I always review in a short story contract first is actually a pair, and that is warranty and indemnification. They often appear together. The warranty clause is you making promises at a minimum that you're the author and you own the copyright, and that your short story doesn't infringe on anyone else's work. If those 2 things are true, life is good. You have no problems. But if those 2 things are not true, say someone claims that you copied their story and they sue the publisher, well, that triggers the next clause, which is indemnification. Indemnification is just a fancy legal word for reimbursement. You'll see lots of words in indemnification clauses, lots of fancy words like indemnify, hold harmless, save, defend, and then you might see things like bend over backwards, take your firstborn child. Okay, I'm being facetious, but these clauses are the very picture of legalese, and this is probably what you have in your head when you think of complicated contracts. To speak even more English, it means that if your actions cause the publisher to get sued, you have to pay them back for their legal costs. Now, let's agree. You really don't want that to happen. But let's also agree that if an author lies and that lie leads to a lawsuit, then they should be responsible. That's fair. And here's the thing. An indemnification clause is necessary and non-negotiable. It's a sobering reminder that, Even though writing feels fun and creative, the legal world is always just one clause away. And that, I know that kind of scares some people, makes you paranoid, but it is what it is. And if you've ever read an indemnification clause and you felt that little shiver, a little tingle down your spine, and that's normal. You're supposed to feel that way. Now, I will say that these clauses can get complicated fast, and I deal with them often in my day job. And I find that even seasoned attorneys who litigate these kind of clauses for a living often get confused and tangled up with them. I like to joke that the longer and more confusing an indemnification clause is, the more terrified the publisher is of getting sued. That's Michael La Ronn's extremely unscientific opinion. And I find that there is a direct correlation between the two. That's why you sometimes see really strange and redundant language in indemnification clauses, because it makes the publisher feel better, but it may not actually mean anything if a lawsuit happens. That's why it's important to understand how these work in principle so that you can kind of identify when stuff like that happens. Now, some contracts have an indemnification clause, some don't. I've actually signed contracts that didn't have an indemnification clause, so you may not always see it. Sometimes you'll see a warranty clause, but no indemnification clause, or other times you'll see both. Sometimes you may see both combined into a single section. But in any case, let's go deeper into what you need to know. To protect yourself, ask smart questions. 1, do I meet every condition in the warranty? 2, what is the publisher warranting in return? And 3, am I being asked to take responsibility for something outside of my control? These questions will keep you safe. For example, let's say you're looking at a contract that says you warrant that you wrote the story, fine, and that you're not infringing on any copyright or trademarks, which you're not, and that you didn't use AI. Now, we can agree that clicking a button and having an AI write you a story is a terrible idea and probably in breach of that contract. But what if you used AI for brainstorming or light editing? Is that a breach of contract? This is why clarity matters. If there's any doubt, always ask the editor to clarify or tweak the warranty clause accordingly. You want to go out of your way to avoid breaching the warranty clause. Let me repeat that for those in the back. You want to go out of your way to avoid breaching the warranty clause. And don't forget, publishers also make warranties. They're promising to publish your story, for example, and to handle it ethically. So they even agree in some cases to indemnify you. So this is not all on you. It's not entirely one-sided. And a final note, do with this what you will. You only want to agree to indemnify the publisher if you're actually at fault, meaning the problem was caused by something that you did wrong, not something outside of your control. So you should not be required to indemnify the publisher for things that they did, like their own negligence or errors in the production or a frivolous third-party claim, right? I think that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. That's why fair indemnification clauses might include phrases like, to the extent caused by the author's breach of this agreement or negligent act, to use some legalese. If you don't have language like that, then it's possible that the clause could unfairly shift legal risk to you, even for problems that the publisher caused. But look, guys, there are so many factors with indemnification that come into play here that we're very, very quickly approaching lawyer territory. The most important thing I want you to take away from this is that if you ever see an indemnification clause that you don't understand, use an AI model like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, copy and paste it into that model, and ask them to explain it to you for a plain English breakdown. This is a great way to understand what you're agreeing to before signing, and it will help you tremendously. Another important point, warranty and indemnification clauses can sometimes be scattered into little pieces throughout the contract. Most often they're together and clearly labeled, but not always. So it's not necessarily a red flag. Just be aware of it. Anyway, don't be afraid of warranty and indemnification clauses. Don't let yourself get frustrated. Just make sure that you understand them as best as you can. And there you have it, my friends. The top 3 clauses that are my personal deal breakers in any short fiction contract. Now, you still need to read the whole contract, of course. You can't just read those 3 clauses and then just sign that thing away. But now you know what matters most. And I will tell you that 9 out of 10 times, If your grant of rights, payment terms, and warranty and indemnification clauses look fair, the rest is just a formality and often minor details that you just need to clarify with the publisher. But if those three clauses are filled with red flags, oh boy, you can bet that the rest of the contract is probably going to be problematic. So before we continue, let's just take a quick breather. So remember that a contract is like a human body. Each section of the contract is like a body part. And if one organ's failing, then odds are the others are stressed too. Everything connects. So as you read and negotiate your contract, try to think about how each of the different sections affect each other. It's not easy to do this at first. I mean, that's the whole reason people go to law school, right? So it's not easy, but that's how you start to think broader. And it's how you can spot hidden traps and understand what you're really signing. So, that means reading the contract a couple times. That's okay. It's totally normal. Don't feel bad about having to reread your contract multiple times until you understand it. Even lawyers do that. And honestly, you're a writer. You're not a lawyer. And contracts are meant to make you pause and think. And you want to know something else? Even lawyers struggle to memorize every detail in a contract. That's why it really helps to print your contract out and write on it. Because science says that when you annotate as you read, you're actively engaging with the material, and that makes it much easier for you to understand and remember it. So don't be afraid to dust off and get out that inner high schooler, back in the day when we had to read all those boring textbooks and we would annotate with highlighters and colored pencils and Post-it notes and sticky tabs. All that is fair game. And that, honestly, if you do that, that would automatically put you in a pro mindset because it means you're not playing around. All right. I'm going to drink some more coffee and we're going to move on. Now that we've covered the essential clauses, let's talk about some clauses that are usually not an issue, but sometimes they can be. So we're going to talk about the situations where some of these clauses could be problematic. Let's talk about deliverables. So the deliverable section lays out how your story moves from acceptance to publication. So in other words, it's how the thing actually gets made, how the sausage gets made. That's what we'll call it. We'll call it the sausage clause. Okay. So at a minimum, it should explain how edits are handled and who has the final say, when the magazine or anthology will publish, timelines for crowdfunding projects like Kickstarters, and any other production extras like audiobooks, for example, which usually have their own schedule. I almost made this part of my top 3, but I didn't for one important reason that I'll tell you later. Let's talk editing, because this is the big one. There are 2 types of editing that you'll encounter. Substantive editing, which includes changes to story, pacing, or structure. Could be anything from fixing plot holes to rewriting scenes. And proofreading, which is just catching typos, formatting quirks, and polishing the final text. Now, editing varies widely. It's crazy how different it is from project to project. I mean, some projects will have both substantive editing and proofreading. Others will have just proofreading. Others will just take the stories as is. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. So the big question is, how much editing is enough and who decides when it's done? If the editor asks you to rewrite the ending and you refuse, what happens? Well, because we're talking about contracts in this contract masterclass, a good contract will tell you. Here's the golden rule. The editor has the final say. If that doesn't sit right with you, then just do yourself a favor and don't sign the contract. Just don't submit your short story to magazines or anthologies because you're just kind of wasting everybody's time. Editors are juggling tons of authors and deadlines, and they need the authority to finish projects. You want them to be able to publish your story, right? So that said, good editors are flexible, though. They'll allow a couple of rounds of back and forth. They'll let you go back and forth a couple times, usually 2 or 3 times before they make the call or they give you the choice of walking away. You can also ask for a couple of rounds of edits as well if you have a particularly long or a complex story that might need some additional editing. That's all negotiable. Now, for stories where the editor did a substantive edit, in my personal experience, because I know some people want to know, well, how much editing do they actually do? It's not a lot. it's probably more than you think, but it's not a lot. And I found that almost all of the edits I got were reasonable, and a lot of them caught stuff that's like, oh crap, thank you for catching that. And they were on point. I have not yet had, substantial rewrite requests or anything like that. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but for the most part, it's pretty chill. Oh, and sometimes editors might make suggestions that just make you roll your eyes. Suggestions that make you go, huh? Or really? Or just suggestions that you just flat out might not agree with. It doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes you do get somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, okay? Just has to be said. So you should always have the right to walk away if you're not happy with the edits. And it's better to cut ties than to have both parties go through the whole process of publication and resent each other. Proofreading, on the other hand, it's pretty simple. It's exactly what you think it is. We don't need to go into that. But there's one common pitfall that you have to be aware of, and that is that once you approve your final substantive edits, you can't go back. You can't make changes later. So review your substantive edits very carefully before signing off. Review your proofreads carefully too. I mean, that's the last stop before the train leaves the station. But be very careful when you're signing off on your edits. Be very thorough. My rule, Michael La Ronn's personal responsibility rule, I guess you could call it, is that once I sign off, the edits are done. They're done. If I find something after the fact, that's on me. Nothing irritates an editor more than authors sending last minute fixes right before they're ready to launch. So just don't be that guy. Just don't do it. So once you sign off, you have signed off. If you think about it like that, then you'll do your reviews correctly. Now, we should also talk about production and publication. So the deliverables section should also explain when your story will actually see daylight. If an editor gets sick or ghosts you or cancels the project entirely, then what happens to your rights? A strong contract will say that if the magazine or anthology isn't published by a certain date, usually within a year of acceptance, all rights revert to you. Magazines with solid reputations are usually fine here. You don't have to worry about that. But anthologies can be riskier, especially those that are tied to crowdfunding like Kickstarters. Kickstarter anthologies fail all the time. So that makes this particular section an important one to think about if you're contributing to an anthology. To protect yourself, work with magazines and publishers that have a proven track record. If you've never heard of somebody and they're launching their very first anthology, you might want to sit that one out, right? But if they've published a few issues or anthologies in the past, then it means that they've probably worked out a lot of the problems and they've kind of got it figured out on how they will produce. Okay, so why didn't this one make my top 3? Because I alluded to that a little bit earlier. Deliverables didn't make my top 3 deal breakers because if you're working with reputable magazines or publishers, then this section usually takes care of itself. Additionally, reputable editors and publishers often make rights reversions clear in the contract to begin with. So that's a good thing, right? So it's still important, but good editors and established presses already have reliable systems in place. If this is something you're worried about, you can always ask to insert a sentence about rights reverting back to you if the work is not published within a certain time frame. But do be prepared to give the editor a little leeway. Don't be overly strict with the timelines. Life does happen. As long as the editor is actively communicating with you, I wouldn't necessarily lay the smack down if they're a couple of days or a couple of weeks late. Just keep communicating with them and just know that every deliverable section has the best of intentions and delays can happen to even the best of us. The next clause is one that almost never causes problems until it does. And when it does, it turns into a nightmare. And that's the assignment clause. I also debated putting this one in my top 3. You've probably seen a theme here. But you don't see problems with the clause that often, so I gave it an honorable mention here instead. But I have personally seen problems with this, so I wanted to make sure it was near the top. So a generic assignment clause simply states that the contract is binding to the author and the publisher's heirs. Basically, when you die, your spouse or children can continue to stand in on your behalf. All right, no problems there. However, the trouble is when these clauses spell out if and how your contract can be assigned, sublicensed, or transferred to a third party. So let's stop here. If you ever see these words, assign, sublicense, or transfer, your spidey senses should start tingling. Riddle me this. Imagine the publisher who bought your story gets acquired by another company. Who now owns your license? Who owes you money? Who controls your story? That's what the assignment clause dictates. I have two golden rules with assignment clauses. First, if there's any transfer language, always assume that the assignment clause will end badly for you. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will end badly for you, but it just puts you in the right thinking mindset. Second, don't let a publisher assign, sublicense, or transfer your license without your written approval. That single safeguard can save you from serious headaches later. And remember, this should cut both ways. Just as you wouldn't want the publisher to assign your license without your consent, the publisher wouldn't want you to assign anything without their consent either, right? I've been incredibly successful in negotiations when I made this point. Okay, so I'm going to back all this up here. If you want to see how ugly, and I mean ugly, this can get, look up the Tess Gerritsen versus Warner Brothers lawsuit over her novel Gravity. I'll give you the short version. Tess Gerritsen licensed her film rights to New Line Productions. The contract said she'd get paid and credited if New Line was ever acquired by another company. Pretty smart to put that in there, by the way. Then Warner Brothers bought New Line, and guess what? Warner Brothers found a way to sidestep that clause completely. So Gerritsen did everything right on paper, and she still lost. I'll link to an article on the Authors Guild that has more details on this case, just so you can read it. So this is why you should always assume that an assignment clause won't protect you. Make sure that no one can transfer your rights without your explicit permission. Now, again, I don't know how this would have shaken out if we were in an alternate universe, but I suspect that if Tess Gerritsen had had a line about the movie studio not being able to transfer her rights to Warner Brothers without her written approval, it would have likely forced Warner Brothers to negotiate a fair deal with her, and we would have had a completely different outcome. May not have even had a lawsuit to begin with. So just something to be aware of, and consider yourself warned. Next, we're going to talk about do not compete clauses. And some people might be thinking, well, Michael, why are you including do not compete clauses in short fiction contracts? Well, stay tuned. So a do not compete clause restricts you from doing anything that might compete with the publisher or hurt sales of the bigger work. You won't see it often in short fiction contracts, okay? But it does appear from time to time. So it's just more of a public service announcement. Now, earlier in this video, we talked about the exclusive period. And technically, that functions as a do not compete window, if you think about it, right? So during that exclusive window, the publisher has the exclusive right to publish the story, and you agree not to do anything else with it, okay? That is completely normal. The real problem is when publishers try to extend that restriction beyond the exclusive period, or worse, require you to get permission to reuse or republish your own story, even though you own the copyright. Now, Michael La Ronn's opinion only. It's not legal advice, just my personal opinion. And I think a lot of pros in the industry would agree with me. And that's as I don't sign do not compete clauses, period. Especially not for short fiction. But I have seen them in short fiction contracts. In fact, I was offered a contract that had a do not compete clause in it. So they're out there. Stay safe out there. Keep your eyes open. Keep your eye on the ball. This one clause can quietly cripple your writing career. And if you ever see it, ask for it to be removed. And if they don't remove it, walk away. No short fiction publisher worth their salt will ever put a do not compete clause into their contract these days. Next, let's talk about archive rights. So from time to time, you'll also see archive rights, sometimes called archival rights. This comes into play when an editor wants to keep your story in print or available on their website after publication, as is the case with many short fiction magazines, which have online websites in addition to print versions and electronic versions. So here's why this matters. Once the exclusive period ends, all rights technically revert back to you. However, if the editor kept your story available on their website without permission, then technically they would be infringing on your copyright, even if it's accidental. That's bad for them and for you because, in most cases, you want your story to stay visible, right? Like you want people to be able to stumble upon your story and discover it and then find your work and then buy your books long after the magazine has been published, right? I mean, that's the holy grail. We all want that, generally speaking. And the archive clause simply formalizes that intent. Now, in an archive clause, you'll usually see these three key words. The first is perpetual, which means the publisher can keep it up as long as they want or deem necessary. Now, some people have problems with the word perpetual, so it's up to you if you want to negotiate that to be narrower, if you want a specific period of time, for example. The second word is non-exclusive, which means they no longer have the exclusive right to publish the story after the exclusive period ends, because those rights have reverted back to you. Now, the third word that you generally want to see is non-commercial, meaning they can't continue to monetize your story. The top short fiction magazines like Clark's World and Lightspeed often keep short stories on their website for readers to discover in the future. And most authors want that. And that is an example of a non-commercial use. Now, quick word of caution. Every once in a while, you'll find a contract that tries to sneak in a rights grab in the archive clause. Something that results in you giving away more rights than you intended, potentially your entire copyright. Now, I've personally seen that happen in a short fiction contract that was offered to me, so I'm speaking from experience here. Suffice to say that I ran away fast. So here's your golden rule, and I want to make this crystal clear for you. Make sure your archive rights and your grant of rights match and align. There should be a clear line of when the grant of rights ends and when the archive rights begin. In this simplified example, we can see where the first rights begin, where the exclusive period ends, and where the archive rights begin. You'll see we have the exclusive period, which is January through June, and we're licensing ebook and print rights only. Starting in July and lasting for the rest of your life plus 70 years is the archive period, and it's for ebook and print only. This conceptually is what you want, okay? But here's where you can step into deep doo-doo, as wise scholars often say. What if your grant of rights is fine, but your archive rights suddenly takes all your rights? See what we just did here? Now, the publisher is taking the ebook, print, and all formats, including formats yet to be developed. And look at what we've just done. We've just potentially given away our entire copyright because of a sneaky rights grab. This is very, very dangerous. And this is why you should be very careful with archive rights. Now, as I said, I'm speaking from personal experience here. I was offered a contract exactly like what you see on the screen here. And if I didn't know what I was doing, I would have lost the copyright to one of my short stories entirely. And that would have been a tragedy. I don't want that to happen to you. But don't worry. Now that you know what to look for with archive rights, you'll be able to spot these issues easily. The next clause we're going to talk about is moral rights. So when you own a copyright, you don't just control the money side. You also control something called moral rights. Moral rights are all about your reputation as the author. For example, you have a right to be credited for your work, to be named as the author, and to not have your story misrepresented or presented in a way that damages your reputation, right? I think we all agree on a basic level that makes a lot of sense. Now, moral rights are a much bigger deal outside of the United States. In the United States, they're pretty limited, and because I live in the United States, I'm not going to go into more detail of moral rights here. That said, though, in most US-based short fiction contracts, you will generally still see a clause where the publisher agrees to attribute the work and the copyright to you on the copyright page. That's normal and a good sign and indicator that you're looking at a moral rights kind of situation. If you want to learn more about moral rights or dive deeper into copyright law in general, check out the Copyright Handbook by Stephen Fishman. It's generally considered to be one of the best practical guides out there, and it's a great addition to any writer's shelf, and probably one that you want to own in print. Now, don't confuse moral rights with morality clauses. They sound similar, but they mean completely different things. A moral rights clause protects the author's integrity and reputation tied to the work. It's about ensuring your name isn't misused or your art distorted. A morality clause, on the other hand, protects the publisher's reputation. It says, in effect, if you do something that embarrasses us, we can cut ties. That might include public scandals, offensive statements, or even just behavior that sparks bad publicity. The tricky part with morality clauses is just how vague they can be. What counts as harmful to reputation? Is it a bad tweet? Bad Facebook post? Article in the newspaper? Hit piece in the Wall Street Journal? Does it require an actual criminal conviction? That's why defining the triggering events clearly in these clauses is so important. And pro tip, do with this what you will, a reverse morality clause is a smart counterbalance. So if the publisher can drop you for a PR disaster, you should be able to drop them if they end up in hot water too. Just saying. Or better yet, might be better if there just wasn't a morality clause to begin with. These clauses are rare. You know, they're not going to be something you see too often. So I wouldn't lose any sleep over them, to be honest with you. Oh man, my coffee's getting cold. I know that I'm throwing a lot at you. And this is just your reminder to remember that the publisher and the editor are not out to get you, right? So a contract exists so that both parties understand each other and both parties know what's expected. And if you do your job right, meaning you work with good people, you sign good contracts, you do as much due diligence as you can when you're reviewing, you should never need your contract, right? So if something goes wrong, editors and publishers usually do everything they can to fix a situation. And that's a stance that you should take too, personally, if things go wrong on your side. So, I can count on one hand the number of times I had to pull out a contract long after it was signed. And it was usually just because I forgot like a date or something like that. I needed to confirm if the rights reverted back to me. So, look, I know that this stuff can be scary, and, contracts have a way of making people paranoid. They make people, I don't know, they make non-lawyers just act weird, and I just want you to know that, your first instinct is going to be to try to control everything, but you're not going to get everything you want always, right? Sometimes you do. Sometimes you get everything you want and more. Sometimes you have to make compromises, and ultimately, you should only make compromises that you're prepared to live with. And as long as you give it your best shot, hopefully, like I said, you're never going to need this contract. And with that, the coffee is going down because we're moving into smoother waters. So we're going to go over contract clauses now that likely won't cause you any headaches, but you should still know about them. We'll begin with marketing and promotion. Some anthology contracts may include a requirement for the author to do a bit of marketing. Share your book on social media or in a newsletter once or twice during the exclusive period. All pretty normal stuff, and honestly, probably something you should be doing anyway. like if you get published in a short story anthology and you're not marketing it in some way, you're kind of a jerk. Just make sure that the marketing expectations are reasonable, right? I once received a speaking contract that required me to send weekly promotional emails for a month promoting some course or something that I was involved in, and they wanted the email newsletters to only be about that event. I couldn't put anything else in the email, and that's crazy. I turned that down because I wasn't about to spam my audience, and two, I couldn't do enough tap dancing in the world to keep talking about this one event every single week for like a month. No, absolutely not. So just make sure that whatever they ask you to do is reasonable and it fits your comfort level. Next, let's talk about authors' copies. So it's customary for publishers to provide authors with free copies of the book after publication. These are often referred to as contributors' copies. And for ebooks or audiobooks, you usually get a download link. And for print books, you usually get 1 or 2 contributor copies. And it's a nice perk. Some authors put the books on their brag shelf. They'll give them to family, or they'll use them for reader giveaways. It's really kind of up to you what you do with them. If you'd like more copies than the free copies, then most publishers will allow you to purchase the books at cost plus shipping, which is usually standard. Beyond that, though, there's not much fine print here. This is one of the simpler and friendlier clauses you'll encounter. Okay, now we're going to talk about media liability insurance. So here's the deal. You will rarely see media liability insurance clauses in short fiction contracts. I have, though, so I want to talk about it. But most of the time, this is a clause in traditional publishing deals for novels. But it's worth understanding. So I recognize that what's about to come next is intermediate level. So feel free to skip ahead to the next timestamp or just listen to this section. And if you ever see it down the road, just remember that I said it. There is a woeful lack of information about media liability policies in the author world. And, 99% of people have no idea how they work. But because this stuff is in the realm of my day job, I do. And so I just want to give you guys some information that I promise you will not see anywhere else. So let's start with what media liability is. Publishers buy media liability insurance, also called errors and omissions insurance, to protect themselves from lawsuits involving copyright infringement, libel, or slander. They don't usually advertise that they have it, but if you spot it in your contract, here's what to know. Using this illustration, I'm going to be mean to you for a few minutes. Sorry, but it'll hope this makes sense. Okay. So you license one of your short stories to a publisher, and suppose they publish an anthology of 12 stories, and one of them turns out to be plagiarized, and womp womp, the plagiarized story sadly is yours. So the original author whose story was plagiarized sues the publisher. The publisher files a claim with its insurance company. The publisher is the named insured on the policy. But because the policy covers the publisher, not the author, the insurance company defends only the publisher. Makes sense when you put it that way, right? So let's say that the insurance company determines that you most definitely infringed on the original author's copyright, or that it's determined in the court of law. And the insurance company will pay the original author a settlement. Afterward, the insurance company will turn around and seek reimbursement, known in the insurance world as subrogation, from the author for both the payment and the insurance company's legal fees. If we change these facts, we change the outcome here. If the author is listed as an additional insured, it's a phrase, another fancy phrase in the insurance world, the insurance policy must defend both the author and the publisher. So in that case, the insurance may cover the author's legal costs too. But remember what indemnification clauses typically say. We'll rewind the tape here. Remember that indemnification clauses say that the author must reimburse the publisher's legal fees, right? That would be unfortunate, wouldn't it? To have the insurance company pay the claim on your behalf only to turn around and bill you for it. I mean, that sucks, right? So to prevent this, and this one tip is something 99% of people don't know. Additional insured should also request a waiver of subrogation, okay? Waiver of subrogation, which prevents the insurance company from seeking reimbursement. The company basically agrees not to bill you, even if you caused the claim. And even crazier, insurance companies usually don't bat an eyelash at this type of request. It's so common. I mean, in the commercial insurance world, it's common for additional insureds to have waivers of subrogation as well. And in some cases, it's actually considered malpractice for insurance agents not to ask for waivers. Now, I have to point out, okay, that every media liability policy is different. It's a wild west out there in terms of what these policies say. And there are many endorsements that could radically change how a claim gets paid. And, your mileage may vary. I got to put those caveats in here. But if you understand the best practices, it will hopefully help to keep you safe. So here are my best practices. If you ever encounter a media liability clause, ask to be listed as an additional insured. Request a waiver of subrogation so that the insurance company can't recover costs from you. Ask that the policy be primary and non-contributory, ensuring no additional legal shenanigans that I won't get into here. Just trust me on this one. And most importantly, request a certificate of insurance so that, one, you verify that the publisher did what they told you they would do, and two, that you have it for your records. Okay, so I can't say this enough. Media liability clauses are exceedingly rare, especially in short fiction contracts. They mostly matter for authors that are writing about, things like true crime, autobiography, genres where the risk of defamation is higher. But it's still smart to understand how this works. So be prepared to have the door slammed in your face here. Okay. So generally you're not going to see these clauses, and, they may not even be negotiable when you do see them, but you can ask for these things, and it never hurts to ask, right? So a publisher once included a media liability clause in a short fiction contract for me, and they automatically added me to their policy as an additional insured. And you can bet that I appreciated that, knowing my background. I had nothing to worry about legal-wise, I mean, it was a fantasy story, but it was nice to know that they extended that act of goodwill. Congratulations. We made it through the toughest parts of short fiction contracts. So now we're going to talk about how to actually negotiate like a pro. I know that it may seem daunting to negotiate a contract. This kind of stuff scares people. But remember that in addition to being an author, you're also a business owner. And treating your writing like a business means that you must attempt, to the best of your ability, to negotiate terms that won't hurt your business. And publishers and editors actually expect negotiation. Did you know that? Most authors don't, but they expect it. And so, I suspect that most authors don't ask for anything because they're just scared that just asking it will get them disqualified or something like that. But it doesn't work that way. So I want to teach you in this section how to advocate for yourself and how to do it professionally so that you can get the best results possible. We'll break this down into 3 stages: before the negotiation, during the negotiation, and after the negotiation. Before we continue, let's sip some coffee while I tell you a fun negotiation story. And this story does have a lesson. And if you learn the lesson from this story, then negotiation will be easy for you for the rest of your life. I promise. Okay. So in college, my English department paid famous writers to visit campus. You know, they would fly the writer in, they would have dinner with the faculty, lunch with the students, and then they would give a speech. And we would pay for their plane ticket, hotel, meals, honorarium, simple stuff like that, right? And so we tried to hire a very, very famous author whose name all of you in this video would recognize, but I'm not going to name names. And, we reached out to this author and guess what she wanted? Tons of money, right? Okay. So she wanted more money than what we were offering, which was to be expected. But that wasn't all. She also wanted us to pick her up from the airport, but she wanted a limousine. Okay. So we couldn't just pick her up in a Honda Civic. It had to be a limousine. And she could only be bothered to stay at the most posh hotel in Des Moines, Iowa. I mean, the Hampton Inn just wasn't going to do it. Oh, and here's the kicker. So no dinner with faculty, no lunch with students, no FaceTime with students, not even a Q&A session in the speech. She wanted to fly in, give the speech, and fly out. So do you think we brought her to campus? No, because she was a prima donna. And the lesson here is don't be the prima donna. In every magazine or anthology, there's always that one author that is an absolute pain in the ass to work with. They're often delusional. When you tell them, hey, you're asking for crazy stuff, they then tell you that you're crazy. It's like they live in some alternate reality, and they don't want the moon and the stars. They want the whole damn universe. So simply avoid being a prima donna, and you will make your negotiations 1,000% easier. Trust me. Okay. That's, I guess we call that tip number 0 for negotiations. So now we're going to jump into before the negotiation with our first tip, which is don't talk about the project until the contract is signed. An acceptance email feels amazing, right? But until the contract is signed, nothing is final. And even then, things can still fall through. Let me give you 2 quick stories. Story number 1. One of my stories was accepted by a well-known magazine, and the editor loved it. Sent me this email. He was gushing over it. And he's like, I love what you did with this character. Our readers are going to love this. This is going to be fantastic. And I'm going to pass this on to my, contract person, and they're going to send you something here in the next couple of days. So I'm excited, So a week passes, then a month, and then I reach out to him, and he's like, oh, you haven't got the contract yet? I'll have her get on it right away. And then another week passes, and then 2. And so I emailed him. I said, hey, what's the deal? Are you guys going to take this story, or are you not going to take it? And then my email went, unanswered. And turns out, a few weeks later, the magazine went belly up. So, oh man, good thing I didn't start telling the whole world on social media that I got accepted into this magazine, right? That would have been awkward. Story number 2. Another time, an anthology editor accepted my story, and I was thrilled until I saw the contract. It was terrible, and I had to walk away. So if I had announced the news early, then it would have been awkward for everybody. So here's the rule of thumb. Don't announce your story or your acceptance until you've signed the contract and the publisher gives you the go-ahead. Editors really appreciate that professionalism, and it will save you from some weird situations. Next, never do edits until you have a signed contract. A few times, editors have sent me edits before we had a deal in writing. Don't go there. In the best case scenario, this could be an honest mistake. In the worst case scenario, it means that the contract is going to be awful. So brace yourself. Sometimes, the editor and publisher are working in tandem. And so the editor might send edits before the publisher finalizes the contracts, or, that can happen. Okay. But if that does happen, simply hold on to the contract or hold on to the edits and communicate that you'll return them once the contract is signed. Work out the contract first, then do your edits promptly and whatever else is asked of you. Just be firm and non-negotiable with this stance. My next tip is to treat every story like it could change your career. Remember what I said at the very beginning of this video. You've poured hours, days, months, maybe even years into your story, and it deserves that respect. That doesn't mean being difficult or cocky or being a prima donna. It just means taking the business side seriously. Because here's the truth. You never know which story will be the one that gets you noticed, or the one that wins an award, or the one that leads to bigger things. Often it's the one that you least expect. So give every piece its best shot. Handle each deal with the same care, no matter how small it seems. So now we're moving into the negotiation. You've got the contract, and now it's time to talk terms. Here are some simple principles that will save you from headaches and make you look like a pro. Remember that everything is connected. Let's return to something I said earlier. Many parts of a contract are connected. To take this further, if you change one part of the contract, it could affect another part. For example, as we talked about earlier, the grant of rights is connected to the archive rights. Payments are usually connected to deliverables, and so on. So as you read the contract and negotiate language, stay aware of what revised language in one section might do to other sections. Now, I recognize this can be challenging if you haven't done this before, but with practice, you'll get better at it, I promise. My next tip is the mega tip, the tip to end all tips. It's the one that didn't exist a few years ago, and honestly, it makes us the envy of every author who ever had to negotiate a contract before 2022. And we're talking about ChatGPT. Tools like Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini are amazing at analyzing contracts, translating legal jargon into plain English, and flagging potential issues that you might never have even thought about. And when I say that they're amazing, I mean it. It's like having a lawyer on speed dial. Now, of course, these tools don't provide legal advice, okay? But they do offer insights and perspectives that can help you spot red flags before you sign anything. They might even help you spot inconsistencies in the language too. And for authors who aren't lawyers, gosh, I gotta tell you, this is a game changer. This is a genuine superpower. And a lot of these tools are free. Now, regardless of how you feel about AI, I know that many of you watching are kind of all over the place in terms of the spectrum about how you feel about it. And I get it. This is one use case that I hope we can agree it makes a lot of sense. First, respect confidentiality. Always redact names and payment details and any identifying information before ever sharing a contract with an AI. Next, double check everything. AI tools can make mistakes, so never take their interpretations as gospel, and always make sure that you verify anything important yourself. Use these tools wisely, and you'll negotiate with more confidence and clarity than most authors in history ever could. My next tip is one that is the next best thing to ChatGPT, and that's a mentor. If you have a mentor who knows short fiction, consider asking if they'll look at any sections of the contract that you might be concerned about, under confidence, of course. Many mentors would be more than happy to do this because, yes, they want to help you, but seeing the contract can help them avoid potential problems too. So this is a win-win because they're getting some valuable inside knowledge too. This is especially true if your mentor is a pro. Just remember to always respect confidentiality. The next tip is to assume mistakes, not malice. If something looks concerning, don't assume that the editor is trying to pull a fast one. Maybe they copied that language from another contract and never thought about it. Or maybe no one ever asked them to change it before. You'll always get further faster by assuming good intentions. Be polite, ask questions, and stay calm. It's also a great way to gauge who you're dealing with. If the editor gets defensive when you politely raise an issue, oh boy, does that tell you a lot. But if they're open and flexible, that's a green flag. Next, treat every clause as if it could be weaponized against you. This one's the flip side of our last tip. And yes, two things can be true at the same time. There's a great quote from Christine Catherine Rush that I think about all the time when I think about this, and I'll paraphrase it probably very badly. And she says, pretend every person at the other end of the negotiations table will be replaced by an evil demon after the ink dries. Now, you don't have to act like this person is an evil demon, okay? I think we both agree that's probably a bad idea. But you should read the contract as if one might show up later. This mindset is helpful because it helps you spot weaknesses and also protect yourself without turning your negotiations into a fight. Next tip, if there are more than 3 deal breakers, ask yourself if it's worth continuing. Negotiations should feel collaborative, right? They shouldn't be a fight or a war, okay? So if you're flagging every other sentence, that's just a red flag about the relationship itself. Or, it's an indicator that maybe you're being overzealous, but, we won't go there. So ask yourself, if it's this tough before signing, what's it going to be like after you sign the contract? Next tip is to put all your cards on the table up front. When you're asking for revisions, list everything at once and explain why it matters. I usually like to order my requests by importance. So what I do in my emails is I put the big things first, and then it goes all the way down to the nice to haves. This helps me stay organized. All right. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to nickel and dime publishers one clause at a time. So there's nothing worse to agreeing to one change and then bringing up another thing, and then agree to that and then bring up another thing. That just frustrates everybody and it slows down the deal. Just get everything on the table and then negotiate everything. My next tip is to say no quickly. So, we're writers, we're intuitive folks. Trust your gut, okay? If the negotiation feels off or you just can't see a clear path to an agreement, then I argue, personally, it's just better to walk away than to drag things out. Publishers respect authors who respect their time. And the publishing world is small. It's a small world. A lot of people know each other. And I think it's just better for your reputation to walk away early and keep your reputation intact than to be the author that people whisper about. My next tip is don't be afraid to walk away. Maybe there are too many deal breakers in the contract, and maybe both sides are negotiating their best, but you just can't get there. It's okay to withdraw your story from the collection. After all, if your deal breakers are actually deal breakers, then the principled approach is to walk away. Sometimes when you walk away, they'll chase you, and then you have leverage to negotiate better terms. But you won't know if that will happen until you have the courage to walk away, so you should have the courage to do it. Now, I've walked away from short story contracts, and those fizzled out, and I was okay with it. And I've walked away from some, and the publisher chased me. So this can happen. But I will tell you that my favorite walkaway story actually happened at a car dealership. When I was a kid, my grandfather was buying a car, and the car salesman was trying to lowball him, doing what car salesmen do, right? And so my grandfather, not one to mince words, told the guy to his face that he was crazy. And he just turned around and just walked out. Like, I had to go chase my grandfather. Like, I thought we were going to buy this car. He's like, I'm not buying that car. And by the time we got to the car salesman and his boss were literally falling over themselves, running after my grandfather, begging him to reconsider. So suffice to say that my grandfather drove off that lot with the car he wanted on his terms. While I never advocate for telling someone they're crazy, you should most definitely tell the publisher why you're walking away if you choose to do so. You might catch them by surprise, and you never know what they might do. However, only walk away if it's based on your principles. Don't use this as a negotiation tactic. I know some people will try that, and that, to me, that's a little cheap and tacky to do the whole theatrics of, well, I'm going to walk away because then they're going to find, no, don't do that. Walk away and be prepared for the deal to be over. All right. And treat it as a pleasant surprise if they chase you, and simply continue the negotiations the best that you can. Okay. That's how to do it correctly. Next tip, don't negotiate over the phone or on a virtual platform like Zoom. Dean Wesley Smith shared this advice with me a few years ago, and I've always been grateful for it. So I'm just passing it along. I know most of you probably wouldn't dream of picking up a phone to discuss a contract. We're writers after all, and introverts unite separately in our own bedrooms. But every now and again, a publisher or editor might suggest a phone call. Here's the thing. In some states and territories around the world, for my friends outside of the US, a verbal agreement can be considered legally binding under certain conditions. This means that anything you say on the phone could, in theory, be treated as part of a contract. You might agree to something without realizing it, or your words could simply be misunderstood. To protect yourself, keep all your negotiations in writing. That way you have a clear record of what was said, what was agreed to, and by whom. No misunderstandings, no he said, she said crap, just clarity and safety. Next tip, follow the 2-meal rule. Here is one of my favorite hacks here. It's one of my favorite negotiation tips. If someone emails you in the morning, reply by dinner. If they email you at night, reply by the next afternoon. This rhythm keeps communication fast without feeling frantic. You don't want your emails to look like a instant message session. Oh my God, I think I just dated myself. You don't want your emails to look like a Facebook Messenger session. And maybe that's a better way to say it. Excuse me while I see myself out. But at the same time, you don't want to be that person that takes a week to reply to emails either. So this rhythm keeps things moving, and it shows the editors that you're considering what they're saying and that you're prompt. Next tip is to be professional, polite, and direct. So proofread your messages. For the love of all that is holy in the world, please proofread your messages and keep them thorough but concise. So save the emojis and the casual phrases for another time. You need to come across as a pro, okay? You need to look like a pro who's done this before. Ideally, prefer many times, okay? So you also want to come across as someone who they need more than you need them. You don't want to look like the desperate author. So in your email, when you're asking for what you want, state clearly what you want, and then really listen to what the editor wants too. Sometimes you'll need to read between the lines. Another hack, I like to use bullet points in my emails. It forces me to write more concisely, and it makes the emails easier to scan and understand as well. Next tip, if you want something changed in the contract, propose the exact wording you want. Don't just flag a problem, offer a fix. Don't say, I'd like the grant of rights to be narrower, please. That's vague. Instead, say, I'm prepared to license this story to you for 1 year and suggest the actual revisions to the language to accomplish it. And when you send those revisions, make them impossible to miss. Use strike-throughs, highlighting, or bullet points so your edits are clear and professional. My next tip is something I said earlier, which is you won't get everything you want. That's okay. Negotiation isn't about winning, right? I know it feels like an adversarial thing, but it's really not, okay? It's about finding an agreement that you can live with. And that's going to look different for each and every one of you watching, for each and every one of your contracts. So weigh the risks, pick your battles, and decide what matters most to you. All right, so now we're after the negotiation and you've signed, celebrated, maybe done a little happy dance, but the work isn't over yet. We still have a few things left. Here's how to stay organized and professional after the contract is in place. Tip, always ask for the double executed contract. Just as the editor expects you to sign the agreement, they need to sign it too. And until both signatures are on the page, the deal isn't complete. So always request the double executed copy, meaning a fully signed version with both you and the publisher's signatures and dates on it. And keep that contract for your records, okay? It's your proof that the agreement is official, and in the hopefully unlikely chance that you need the contract down the road, you've got it. Next tip, keep your contracts organized. Oh man, contracts have a way of disappearing when you need them most, and you do not want that to happen. So it doesn't matter how you do it, okay? Whether it's paper, electronic, doesn't matter. But find a system that works for you. I personally like to keep a digital version of the contract in the same folder as the final edited version of my story. So everything related to the story lives in one place. And whether you use Dropbox or Google Drive or a hard drive folder labeled contracts or a filing cabinet, just make sure you can find your contracts fast. Future you will thank you. Next tip, track your deliverables. If the contract includes milestones or deadlines, get them on your calendar immediately with reminders. Never rely on memory with this stuff. These contracts have a way of being quite long in terms of timelines. And your brain is for writing stories. It's not for remembering due dates. So here's what I typically track in Google Calendar. I'll track the date edits are due. I'll track the publication date, and then I'll track the date that the exclusive period ends. So that way I know when the rights are reverted. All right. And then I'll usually add some reminders, a couple days in advance so that nothing slips through the cracks. And if there's a deliverable that I put on my calendar that falls on me to deliver, I always strive to be early and never late. My final tip is about what to do when things go wrong. And I'd be remiss not to talk about this, okay? So let's say you wake up one morning to find that a publisher released a version of your story that you never authorized. Or maybe you posted your story on your website and suddenly there's a cease and desist letter in your email inbox, okay? This is where the rubber meets the road and where your contract becomes your lifeline. First, and most importantly, stay calm. Cooler heads always prevail in these types of situations. Because you followed my advice, you have your contract saved somewhere that's easy to find, I hope. So pull it up and read it carefully. If you're unsure about what something means, you can always ask a trusted mentor, expert, or even run a section by ChatGPT to get a general explanation of what could potentially be going on. Although just remember, these AI models don't give you legal advice. Next, I want you to ask yourself, what does the contract actually say? Who's right? Who's wrong? If you can even make those determinations. Or is there any ambiguity? Is it in the air? You need to determine here if you screwed up or if they screwed up or if it's in the air, like I said. If you discover the breach, contact the publisher politely but firmly. Explain the issue clearly and, at least at first, assume good faith. Give them a chance to correct it by a specific deadline. If they fix it, great. Okay, that's what you want. If not, then it's time to evaluate your options. If they accuse you of a breach, don't panic. Read your contract, check the facts, and get input from trusted peers or mentors. If the publisher is right, or if you feel that they may have a point, do what you can to resolve the issue quickly and professionally, just as you would expect them to do for you. If the publisher's wrong, or if you believe that they're wrong, explain your position calmly and give them a chance to walk it back. If they won't, then you may need to consider legal steps. Okay, let's pause and take a breath. You came to this masterclass to get non-sugar-coated advice. That's my specialty, and it's my job to give it to you. Okay? Now, hopefully, you never need to use the information I just gave you in this tip, okay? Because if you understand copyright, if you negotiate smartly, and if you work with reputable publishers, then your chances of facing this kind of conflict are actually quite small, okay? And you've reduced those chances considerably by following the advice in this video. So I don't want you to lose sleep over this, okay? Spend that energy writing your next great story. Follow all of these tips in your negotiations, my friends, and you will be just fine. You now know how to spot red flags, how to ask smart questions, and protect your creative work like a pro. Now you might be wondering, hey, Michael, what do I do next? We've talked about all this stuff in the masterclass. I've gotten a short story accepted. I negotiated the contract like a pro. The exclusive period is up, and the rights have come back to me. But what exactly do I do next? As we discussed, you can submit your stories to additional magazines and anthologies as a reprint, or you can publish the stories in your own books, make money that way, or you can publish them on your blog or give them away. The limit is your imagination. And remember, you still own the bundle of sticks because you did it right. So do whatever you want. I'll tell you a story on what I do. I have started publishing my stories in a short story series, and it's called Michael La Ronn Strange Stories. And as the exclusive period expires on stories that I've licensed to anthologies and magazines, I publish those stories in the series. So that way I can utilize my reprint rights. And I put this in, I put the story series in my bio whenever I'm published in magazines or anthologies so that readers can find more of my stories. Because my thought process is, if you've just read a short story from someone that you really like, you may not necessarily be willing to make that commitment into a novel or a series. But you might be willing to make a commitment. It might seem like a little bit easier and a little bit less friction if you've got a series of stories that they can buy, particularly the story that they just read, right? So that's one thing that I do. Do with that what you will. Now let's talk about where to go next. And I want to talk about some resources that will take your understanding even deeper. The first resource I want to recommend is the Copyright Handbook by Stephen Fishman. This is the single most comprehensive resource on copyright law for creators. It's dense, yes. It's not cheap, no, but it's worth every penny. Just trust me. Just trust me. Just go buy this book right now and just read a little bit of it. every time you have a chance, and you will learn a ton. The next resource I want to recommend is one that it's sometimes hard for me to believe that this actually exists, and that's Copyright X Lectures by Harvard University Law School. So this isn't a book. This is actually a free series of copyright lectures by Harvard Law School. These videos are fascinating. They're surprisingly approachable. And this is the stuff they teach you in law school, right? About copyright law. And the videos are a little dry, but they're dry in a charming way. Okay, so they're perfect for playing in the background while you work, you do chores, driving to work, that sort of thing. And something else that you don't want to miss in the Copyright X lectures, there is a helpful mind map. It's an interactive mind map that you can bookmark that ties all of the different copyright concepts together. Super helpful resource and completely free. The next resource I want to recommend is Closing the Deal on Your Terms by Christine Catherine Rush. This book was originally titled Deal Breakers, and this is a classic book. It breaks down publishing contracts from an author's perspective. Chris has been through it all. She's tough, she's smart, and she's very generous with her insights. I say this one is an absolute must-read. Next resource, Playing the Short Game by Douglas Smith. This is a fantastic guide to building a career with short fiction, and it includes a lot of practical advice on contracts, submissions, and rights. This was the first book of its kind on the market and one that must not be missed. And last but not least, I also recommend Taking the Short Tack by Maddie Dalrymple and Mark Leslie Lefebvre. This is a great deep dive into the business of short fiction. Mark Leslie needs no introduction in the self-publishing community. He's been around for a very long time. And Maddie Dalrymple has also been around for a long time. And I've co-written 2 books with her, so I can vouch for this one. And here we are. I got my coffee, which is super cold now, but we're at the end of the video. So thanks for hanging in there. I'm sure that you are pleasantly overloaded right now, and that's totally fine. This was a lot. Right? And if I can help just one of you avoid signing a bad contract, then I've done my job. If you found this video helpful, then there are a couple ways you can help a brother out. Goes without saying that please like and subscribe for more videos on the business of writing. Okay. You can also send a super thanks donation right here on YouTube or buy me a coffee using the link below. You can also share this video with another writer who needs it. I will take all the love on social media I can get. And if you want to see whether my short stories live up to my writing advice, then you can read my award-winning short stories in my Strange Stories series, wherever you get your books. And you can find them at michaellaronn.com/strange stories. And, thanks for watching. And just remember that every story you write is a brick in the foundation of your writing career. I happen to love short stories. I think they're a labor of love, and I'm sure that you probably feel the same way. And so go forth, write with confidence, negotiate with confidence, and I'll see you in the next video.
Perfect.